Now, some time ago, I picked up this box of Necromunda, which had these really cool miniatures that I thought would be perfect for my Genestealers. Now, when I opened this box, I was greeted with this very strange looking miniature that I didn't really know what to do with. However, when I put it together and flipped it upside down, it kind of looked like some sort of a flying wheelchair with a bunch of organs strapped onto it. Now, as it was going to need a head, and I did want this creature to feel like one of the first generation of Genestealers, I really wanted to go for the bigger one, but it looked absolutely ridiculous, so I ended up settling for the second generation, which matched it better. And seeing the respirator also gave me the additional idea that perhaps I should attach some additional tubes. As this was meant to be the underside of the model, it did lack a little bit of detail, especially in that area, so this was going to be a little bit of a patch towards that. However, once I removed the cables that were in the way, I noticed that there was not going to be a good way to do that, so I ended up settling on a little bit of a compromise. By shortening the tube and carving out an additional hole in the middle, the idea is that this is now a backup cable that he can plug into his respirator. Now, as this creature didn't exactly have a torso, I did consider doing a little bit of sculpting. However, when I went to place the arms, I noticed that it gave it such a frail looking appearance that it matched perfectly of a creature that is being barely kept alive by this absolutely fascinating machine. Now, the one arm was going to be casting a Psyker spell, but for the other, as this is a Genestealer, I gave him some dynamite. Now, I personally have a massive hatred for these flight stands, so I'll be avoiding them at all costs, instead opting in for a version that is a little bit better. Not only are these things much easier to attach, but they also create a much more interesting visual that the miniature is just simply flying by a piece of terrain rather than a magical piece of plastic expanding from the ground to hold it. Given my cult's obsession with the four arms, I thought it'd be quite appropriate that this creature essentially grafted a pair of Tyranid arms onto this life support system. And if there's one truth that resonates throughout the 40k, is that you always need a backup melee weapon. Quite recently, I got a great suggestion to try an effect that I knew would look awesome, and I've seen it done a lot of times to great success, but I've never really attempted it, and grabbing a bit of wire and trying to make it look like some sort of a lightning or an energy source was surprisingly difficult. And that's because I got some incredibly strong metal that just simply refused to bend, and it didn't really look that great. So I ended up finding a different type of wire, which is called essentially a jewelry type of wire. It seems quite similar on the surface. However, once you actually start bending it, it's a lot easier to try to get some shapes out of this versus this, which is much stiffer, and it doesn't really allow you to create those organic lightning moves that I really wanted to achieve. Now, to fill the empty area at the back, I thought it'd be pretty cool to put this tiny little backpack that reminds me a lot of like a portable generator. Perhaps this thing doesn't really need it, or maybe that's what's powering it. You never know. Now, the second member will be Hathor, who will be handling this absolutely enormous looking parasite that is technically a Tyranid. Despite the original idea that this character is essentially inserting the Tyranids inside of the dreadnoughts and similar vehicles, I thought it'd be a pretty cool idea to make her into a Psyker that controls these absolutely terrifyingly modified Tyranids and sends them out to attack her enemies. And while they can go after infantry, their specialization is anti-vehicle, where they slowly eat their way through the armor and burrow inside of it, connecting that special electrical sleeve that is on the Tyranid, overloading the system and creating additional mayhem, as everybody's trying to figure out why the allied tank is all of a sudden firing at random locations. And of course, if you're lucky enough to find a dreadnought and somehow scoop out the previous occupant, you can get yourself a Genestealer dreadnought. And as everybody does need a plan B, that's why she also has a shotgun. A 12 gauge can solve a surprising amount of problems. Now, the third member of this council, nicknamed the Jedi, is going to be a very simple conversion with this very nice looking head and a tail that hints at the fact that there's a lot more crazy stuff happening underneath his clothing, similar to a lot of other Genestealers. Now, as I had a lot of fun making the lightning effect for the professor, I thought it'd be a pretty cool idea to give all of them their own version, but as they're technically 3 different types of Psykers, they'll be representing different attacks, just at the moment, they look exactly the same. I really enjoyed the appearance of Necromunda bases, but as I didn't have enough of them, I was gonna have to improvise with some of these Void bases. However, I was faced with a little bit of challenge, as my Jedi was on the wrong sized base, and I am an idiot and I used Tamiath and cement gluing him to the base permanently, my only solution was to try and carefully slice him off that base, which was going to be quite challenging, and unfortunately resulting in him being just a little bit shorter now. Now, while initially I was going to paint him in the exact same gray that some of my Genestealers have, I sort of had the idea to make these guys in an entirely different color scheme so that they still feel like they're part of the greater Genestealer cult, but they're their own little council. Then I used this fun little trick to get an aged looking metallic by starting with an umber base coat and then dry brushing a metallic paint on top of it. Now, in my previous video, when I made the orc monstrosity, I noticed that when I mixed this color with a little bit of black, I essentially got the exact same color as Bugman Glow, which has been a mystery that eluded me for quite some time. I made various attempts to try to replicate it using a lot of different shades of red, but it turns out this whole time the key to success was this very bright looking peachy color, which worked absolute wonders for the other miniatures, but for this guy, I was already beginning to question my decision, since I really wanted to have an appearance of a crazy alien mutant that just does not look human whatsoever and is flying on this crazy looking hovercraft. I really was questioning my decision if the skin color was going to be correct. So I decided to try and experiment with an idea that I had for quite some time, but I couldn't exactly get right because I couldn't really understand how to get that Bugman Glow highlight, which I needed to be the transitional color into this interesting color called Lilac, which was working better than I expected. It gave the appearance of this dead alien tone that'll match this essentially flying corpse that has been kept alive by this machine for a very long time. Then, to mimic a lot of my other Genestealer mutants, I used this very nice purple color that was going to glaze over the previous layers. As it's an acrylic gouache paint, it's also quite transparent when it's thinned down, so it's not applying as just a solid layer, instead allowing all the previous colors to create this very beautiful gradient that looks incredibly alien. Now, of course, every single army needs an element that is somehow visually connected, and for me, it's not the bases or the armor color, it's this very specific looking weapon color that is essentially present in all of my Genestealers, with the only real exception being the Skaven, as they're technically the mercenaries that are a part Genestealer. Now, as I was getting to the OSL section, I took this as an opportunity to try to spice it up a little bit more. Not only did I make the screen OSL effect on my base quite excessive, but I also ended up painting these additional vents on the side of the essentially flying wheelchair, taking quite a bit of inspiration from this incredible painter who I first saw do this very cool lightning effect, whose style often involves doing a lot of very strong OSL effects, called El Miniaturista. And just like that, I'm banned from entering Spain. Continuing with my crimes against humanity, I did make my best effort with this OSL effect, but it just really wasn't turning out that great. As I've never really attempted this effect, I wasn't really sure how I could make this OSL work, as the lightning was coming across the entire miniature, so if I went with something excessive, the whole thing would just be blue. And as I didn't want to make him look like he just blued himself, I had to come with an alternative idea. So I opted in to create a concentrated effect near the place at the bottom and also at the place connecting to his hand. Now I continue with the lightning effect, trying to create the impression that there's a little bit of a reflection with a bit more emphasis on the lightning that is forking out rather than relatively simplistic lightning that I had there. And hopefully it turned out pretty cool.